In the darkness of a Category 5 hurricane, when digital salvation meant life or death, they laughed at the old man who couldn't even set up his email. The power station engineers had given up, their fancy degrees useless against the fried circuits of the emergency generator that kept the town's medical center breathing. As the backup batteries dwindled to their final minutes, Samuel Reynolds, a Vietnam-era radio operator with hands gnarled by arthritis and time, stepped forward with nothing but a ballpoint pen, 3 feet of copper wire, and 50 years of forgotten knowledge. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he bypassed the digital control panel entirely, rewiring the analog heart of the machine with improvised tools and weathered instinct. "Sometimes the old ways are more reliable than your fancy computers," he muttered, hands steady despite the stakes. The generator roared to life just as the last backup battery flatlined. What other life-saving solutions hide in the wisdom we're so quick to dismiss as outdated? Subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary stories of unexpected heroes who remind us that innovation isn't always about the newest technology. Samuel Reynolds stood at his kitchen window watching dark clouds gather on the horizon. The Weather Channel blared warnings from his ancient television set, the meteorologist's voice tense as animated graphics showed Hurricane Eliza's swirling mass growing from Category 3 to 4, and now to a monster Category 5, strongest storm, to hit Port Haven in 50 years, the meteorologist said. Mandatory evacuation orders are in effect for coastal areas. I cannot emphasize enough the danger. Samuel clicked off the TV with a grunt. At 73, he'd seen his share of storms. This wouldn't be his first hurricane, and he doubted it would be his last. The phone rang. His granddaughter Emma calling from college in Boston. "Grandpa, please tell me you're evacuating," she said, skipping any greeting. "Hello to you too," Samuel replied, smiling despite himself. "Your old grandpa's still got some fight left in him. The news says it's going to be catastrophic. They're closing the highway soon. This house has stood since 1962. It'll outlast me and probably you too," Emma sighed. "Did you at least download that emergency alert app I sent you?" "Haven't figured that out yet," Samuel admitted. "But I've got my radio, batteries, and enough canned food to last weeks." "You're hopeless with technology," Emma said, her tone a mixture of frustration and affection. "Promise me you'll call when it's over?" "I promise, sweetheart." After hanging up, Samuel walked to his bedroom closet and pulled down a battered footlocker marked U.S. Army. Inside lay remnants of another life: dog tags, faded photographs, and his radio operator's kit. From Vietnam, his fingers traced the dials of the field repair kit he'd used countless times in the jungle. Those had been desperate days, when knowing how to fix a radio with whatever you had on hand meant the difference between life and death. Modern soldiers had satellites and computers. In his day, they had wire, tape, and determination. Samuel packed his emergency supplies methodically: water, food, first aid kit, flashlights. He added the repair kit as an afterthought, though he couldn't say why. Old habits died hard. The local news announced Port Haven Medical Center would remain operational throughout the storm, its new generator system designed to withstand Category 5 conditions. Samuel nodded to himself. At least the sick and injured would be safe. Outside, his neighbors loaded cars and boarded windows. The sky darkened prematurely as Eliza's outer bands approached. Samuel hammered the last plywood sheet over his front window, then stepped back to survey his handiwork. The wind was picking up now, bending palm trees and scattering debris. As rain began to fall, Samuel retreated inside, locked his door, and prepared for a long night. The Port Haven grocery was chaotic, shelves emptying rapidly as residents grabbed last-minute supplies. Samuel navigated the crowded aisles with practiced patience, adding batteries and candles to his basket. He'd seen this panic before. "Many times, Mr. Reynolds. Surprised to see you still in town." Samuel turned to find Dr. Marcus Webb, his neighbor's son, and, according to the name badge, now a physician at Port Haven Medical Center. The young man had grown since Samuel had last seen him, now sporting a neatly trimmed beard and the confident posture of someone comfortable in emergency situations. "Not going anywhere," Samuel replied. "This house has weathered worse." Marcus frowned. "This isn't like the storms from 10 years ago. Eliza's a monster." "So they say. How's things at the hospital?" "Busy. We're preparing for the worst. Setting up emergency protocols, checking equipment." Marcus brightened, professional pride evident in his voice. "But our new systems are state-of-the-art. Digital monitoring on everything from the generators to individual patient ventilators. We can control the entire building from tablets now. Samuel nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. What happens when the computers go down? Marcus laughed. That's the beauty of it. Redundant systems, cloud backups, the works. Even if the main systems fail, the digital diagnostics can identify any problem instantly, not like the old days of checking everything manually. Digital diagnostics, Samuel repeated, and if those fail? There are backups for the backups, Marcus said, his tone shifting to one used for placating the elderly. Trust me, Mr. Reynolds, this isn't like the equipment from your generation. Everything's computerized, monitored constantly. Samuel bit back his response. No use arguing with confidence born of inexperience. He'd seen too many systems fail, both in war and peace, to share the doctor's faith in technology. Your grandmother still has that flip phone, doesn't she? Marcus asked, changing the subject. My mom says you refused to get a smartphone. Never needed one, Samuel said. Can't figure out why I'd start now. Marcus chuckled. Well, if you ever want to join the 21st century, I'm happy to help. Those emergency alert apps could be useful during something like this. Samuel nodded politely. I'll keep that in mind. As they parted ways, Samuel couldn't help but notice the irony. The young doctor spoke of technology as if it were infallible, while every system Samuel had ever known eventually failed, especially under extreme conditions. Back home, with the wind now howling outside, Samuel made final preparations. He filled his bathtub with water, checked his flashlights, and tuned his battery-powered radio to the emergency broadcast frequency. Almost as an afterthought, he retrieved his old footlocker again. Beneath the radio kit lay a collection of tools and spare parts he'd accumulated over decades. Wire, electrical tape, solder, clips, and a multi-tool he'd carried since Vietnam. He packed these into a small canvas bag, along with a notebook containing hand-drawn diagrams of Port Haven's older infrastructure from his brief stint as a maintenance worker after the war. Probably won't need any of this, he muttered to himself. Yet, something, instinct honed by years of disaster preparedness, told him to keep the bag accessible. The tools that had saved lives in the jungle might seem primitive compared to Marcus's tablets and digital systems, but they had one significant advantage. They worked without electricity, without computers, without the complex infrastructure of modern technology. As the first heavy raindrops pelted his roof and the sky turned an ominous green-black, Samuel Reynolds sat in his recliner, emergency radio beside him, and waited for Hurricane Eliza to make landfall. The storm announced itself like artillery fire, first distant, then deafening. Samuel's windows rattled as Hurricane Eliza made landfall just after midnight, the wind screaming past at 175 miles per hour. His electricity failed within the first hour, plunging the house into darkness broken only by the beam of his flashlight and occasional apocalyptic flashes of lightning. The old house groaned under Eliza's assault, but held firm. Samuel had built well and maintained better. He sat in darkness, the battery-powered radio his only connection to the outside world. Port Haven Medical Center operating on emergency power. The announcer's voice crackled through static. Main generator has experienced critical failure. Backup systems engaged but with limited capacity. All available emergency personnel requested. Samuel turned up the volume, frowning. The hospital's vaunted systems hadn't lasted 6 hours into the storm. Engineers attempting to diagnose the digital control systems, but power for critical care units estimated at less than 4 hours remaining. Evacuation impossible under current conditions. The radio fell silent for several minutes, then returned with more urgent tones. This is Dr. Patel at Port Haven Medical Center. We have 43 critical patients on life support with failing backup power. Our engineers cannot bypass the primary generator's digital control system. If anyone with experience in Westinghouse GX 5000 generator systems is receiving this broadcast, please attempt to contact the hospital immediately. Samuel recognized the model number, an industrial generator with a traditional mechanical core wrapped in modern digital controls. He'd worked on similar systems years ago. He reached for his phone, but the cell network was already down. The landline produced only a dead tone. Communications were cut off. Samuel stared at the radio, weighing his options. The storm raged at peak intensity, making any journey potentially fatal. But without intervention, dozens of patients might die when power failed. Damn it, he muttered, already knowing what he would do. He dressed methodically in his heaviest rain gear, packed his canvas tool bag, and added a waterproof pouch containing his old field repair manual and the infrastructure maps. He strapped a powerful flashlight to his chest harness, an old military trick that left both hands free. Before leaving, Samuel studied his hand-drawn map of Port Haven one last time, committing to memory the most direct route to the medical center. 2 miles in hurricane conditions might as well be 20, but he'd navigated worse in his youth. He opened his door to meet Eliza's full fury, a wall of wind and water that nearly knocked him off his feet. Rain fell horizontally, stinging his exposed skin like needles. The street had become a churning river carrying debris from damaged buildings. Samuel secured his hood and stepped into the maelstrom, leaning into the wind at a 45-degree angle just to remain upright. His first steps were the hardest, each one a declaration of intent against nature's raw power. The beam of his chest light carved a narrow path through rain so dense it seemed solid. Visibility extended barely 10 feet in any direction. The familiar landscape of his neighborhood had transformed into an alien, hostile environment where landmarks disappeared and new obstacles materialized without warning. Samuel advanced methodically, testing each step before committing his weight, staying close to buildings for partial shelter from the wind. His progress was agonizingly slow but steady. 1 foot in front of the other, he muttered to himself, the words torn away by the wind, just like Da Nang in '68. The memory sustained him. Another storm, another mission where lives depended on his specialized knowledge. The circumstances differed, but the fundamentals remained the same. Assess, adapt, overcome. Halfway to the medical center, Samuel's radio crackled to life again. Backup systems failing faster than anticipated. Estimated 2 hours of critical power remaining. Repeat. Port Haven Medical Center now has approximately 2 hours of emergency power for life support systems. Samuel checked his watch. At his current pace, he would barely make it in time. He pushed forward with renewed determination, his aging body protesting but responding to the demands of necessity. The road ahead had disappeared entirely beneath floodwaters, but Samuel Reynolds moved forward, step by deliberate step, toward the distant lights of Port Haven Medical Center, a mission as critical as any he'd undertaken in war. The hurricane transformed Port Haven into a war zone. Samuel pushed forward through wind that slammed into him like physical blows, each gust threatening to lift him off his feet. Rain reduced visibility to near zero, his flashlight beam swallowed by the deluge after just a few feet. A tremendous cracking sound split the air above the storm's roar. Samuel dove instinctively as a massive oak tree, one that had stood for a century, toppled across the road ahead. Had he been 10 seconds faster, it would have crushed him instantly. New route, he muttered, consulting his mental map. The fallen tree blocked his planned path completely. His alternate route would add precious minutes to his journey, but he had no choice. Samuel backtracked to the last intersection, fighting crosswinds that seemed determined to push him off course. The detour led him along Harbor Street, normally a pleasant avenue lined with shops. Now it had become a treacherous river. Samuel tested the water's depth with a piece of debris before committing to the crossing. The current pulled at his legs as the water rose to his knees, then his waist. Every step required careful calculation. His military training kicked in automatically, assessing risks, identifying stable footing, maintaining situational awareness despite sensory overload. He moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had navigated danger before. Keep your center of gravity low, he reminded himself, leaning forward against the current. Test before you step. A sudden surge pushed the water to chest height. Samuel grabbed a storefront column for stability, waiting for the flood to recede. Slightly before continuing, his tools and repair kit remained dry in their waterproof bag, strapped high across his shoulders. The town's modern navigation landmarks, the LED billboard at the mall, the illuminated clock tower, had all gone dark. Samuel relied instead on older references: the distinctive shape of the courthouse dome, the bell tower of St. Michael's Church, the natural rise of terrain toward the hospital hill. A piece of metal roofing cartwheeled down the street like a lethal frisbee, missing Samuel by inches. He pressed himself against a building wall, calculating the safest approach to cross the next intersection where 2 flood currents converged. The radio at his hip crackled with another update. Backup generator efficiency dropping below 60%. Engineering team attempting manual override of primary system without success. Samuel checked his watch again. He'd been battling the storm for 40 minutes and covered barely half the distance to the hospital. The water was rising faster than he'd anticipated, making each block more dangerous than the last. At the corner of Maple and Fifth, Samuel faced his most difficult obstacle yet. The flood had carved a deep channel across the road, creating a churning rapid too dangerous to cross directly. He scanned for alternatives and spotted a partially submerged pickup truck wedged against a light pole. With careful movements, Samuel made his way to the truck, using it as a bridge to cross the worst of the current. The vehicle shifted ominously beneath his weight but held long enough for him to reach the relative safety of higher ground on the other side. His boots squished with each step now, his pants soaked through despite the rain gear. Age made itself, known in protesting joints and muscles burning from constant resistance against wind and water. But Samuel had long ago learned to compartmentalize discomfort, filing it away as irrelevant data while the mission remained incomplete. A flash of lightning illuminated the world in stark white, revealing his destination at last. Port Haven Medical Center stood on the hill ahead, its lower floors dark but emergency lights still glowing in the upper windows. The facility's helipad beacons blinked feebly, their typical brightness diminished by the storm's ferocity. Samuel allowed himself a moment's relief at the sight. Then he squared his shoulders and pushed forward into the final stretch, the steepest part of his journey, up the exposed hillside where Eliza's winds hit with unobstructed force. Almost there, he told himself, each step deliberate and determined. Almost there. The medical center's emergency entrance stood partially flooded, its automatic doors forced open manually and sandbagged against rising water. Two security guards, in rain-soaked uniforms, helped Samuel inside, surprise evident on their faces at the arrival of anyone during the storm's peak. "Sir, are you injured?" one asked, steadying Samuel's arm. "No," Samuel replied, catching his breath. "Hear about the generator," heard the call on the emergency broadcast. The guards exchanged skeptical glances, but led him into the building. Inside, the scene was controlled chaos, emergency lights casting harsh shadows as medical staff moved purposefully through corridors, checking patients and equipment. Periodic flickering suggested the backup power system's instability. "Command centers on the second floor," the guard explained, pointing toward the stairwell. "Elevators are offline." Samuel nodded, water pooling at his feet as he made his way upstairs. His legs protested after the punishing journey, but he pushed through the discomfort. The hospital's administrative floor had been converted to an emergency operations center. Staff huddled around tables lit by battery-powered lamps, monitoring patient status and coordinating resources. In one corner, a group surrounded what appeared to be the main control station for the building's systems. Samuel approached, catching fragments of tense conversation. "Control module isn't responding to any of the override commands. Did you try forcing a system restart?" "3 times. The diagnostics show a hardware failure but can't isolate the component." At the center of this group stood a woman in her IBIS 30s with a tablet computer and a hospital engineering badge reading, "T. Williams, Chief Engineer." Her expression mixed frustration and growing panic as she swiped through diagrams on the screen. "Excuse me," Samuel said. "I heard your call about the generator. I've worked on similar systems." Tanya Williams barely glanced up. "Are you with the contractor team?" "No, ma'am. Former military radio operator. Worked maintenance here about 20 years back." Now she did look up, taking in his soaked appearance and age with obvious doubt. "We're dealing with a Westinghouse GX5000 with DCM-12 digital control modules. State-of-the-art system. Underneath all that, it's still just a generator," Samuel replied evenly. "Engine alternator control circuits." One of the younger engineers scoffed. "It's not that simple, sir. The digital systems—" "We appreciate you coming all this way," Tanya interrupted, her tone making it clear she didn't appreciate it at all. "But we have trained professionals handling this. Perhaps you should check in with medical if you need assistance." Samuel stood his ground. "Your broadcast said you needed someone familiar with this model." "Yes, someone with current certifications and experience," she said, turning back to her tablet. "We've got engineers from 3 hospitals on video conference right now." From behind him, a familiar voice called out, "Mr. Reynolds?" Samuel turned to find Dr. Marcus Webb approaching, surprise evident on his face. "You made it here? Through the storm?" Marcus asked incredulously. "Your emergency broadcast sounded urgent," Samuel replied simply. Marcus glanced at the engineering team, then back to Samuel. That's incredible dedication, sir, but I think you should get checked out in the triage area. We've got this under control." A sudden power fluctuation sent the emergency lights into a dimming cycle before they stabilized at half brightness. An alarm began to sound from one of the monitoring stations. Backup generators efficiency dropping below 40%, a technician called out. Estimated 90 minutes of critical power remaining. Tanya cursed under her breath, tapping frantically at her tablet. The digital control module is completely unresponsive now. We can't even get diagnostics. Samuel watched silently as the team continued troubleshooting through their digital interfaces, no one approaching the actual generator machinery. Their frustration grew with each failed attempt. Have you physically examined the generator itself? He finally asked. The diagnostics should tell us exactly what's wrong, Tanya replied without looking up. If we can get the control module back online, and if you can't, the question hung in the air. Tanya continued working her tablet as if she hadn't heard him. Marcus touched Samuel's shoulder. Mr. Reynolds, I understand you want to help, but you should really get some rest. These people know what they're doing. Samuel nodded slowly but made no move to leave. Instead, he watched the engineers grow increasingly desperate as their sophisticated tools and remote diagnostics failed to identify the problem. Not one of them had suggested examining the physical machinery. It reminded him of younger radio operators in Vietnam who couldn't function when their test equipment failed, who had never learned to diagnose problems using their senses and basic knowledge of how the equipment actually worked. The lights flickered again, longer this time. From somewhere down the hall, a voice called out, "We've lost monitoring in the ICU." Samuel looked at Marcus. "Son, I've come too far to sit this one out. Now either point me to the actual generator room or I'll find it myself." A hospital administrator, in a rumpled suit, stepped to the center of the command room, raising his hands for attention. The background chatter ceased immediately. "Listen up, everyone. Dr. Patel has informed me that our backup generator is now operating at 35% capacity and declining. At current rates, we have less than 2 hours of power remaining for critical systems." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "We've attempted to contact emergency services for evacuation, but conditions remain impossible for helicopter transport. Our priority now is to prepare for the worst while continuing efforts to restore primary power." The room absorbed this information in tense silence. Samuel watched the engineering team huddle more tightly around their tablets and laptops, their expressions increasingly desperate. "Prepare to transition all non-critical patients to manual monitoring," the administrator continued. "All available staff should report to ICU and critical care for briefing on emergency protocols." As the meeting dispersed, Samuel approached the administrator. "Sir, I'd like to examine the actual generator." The man looked Samuel up and down, noting his soaked clothing and weathered face. "And you are?" "Samuel Reynolds. Former Army radio operator, did maintenance work here years back. I know these systems." The administrator glanced at the engineering team, still focused entirely on their digital interfaces. "Ms. Williams is handling the technical response. And how's that working out so far?" Samuel asked quietly. The administrator's expression tightened, but before he could respond, a young security guard approached. "Mr. Owens, we've got water breaching the lower level east entrance. Need authorization to move emergency supplies to higher floors." The administrator nodded. "Do it." He turned back to Samuel with a distracted wave. "Check with engineering if you want to help." Samuel tried once more with Tanya's team, who remained dismissive. "We can see everything we need from here," she insisted, pointing to her diagnostic screens. "The control module is completely unresponsive. We need to bypass it entirely. But the manufacturer's emergency protocols require authorization codes we don't have." "Have you physically checked the generator itself?" Samuel repeated. "That's not how modern systems work," one of the younger engineers said. "Everything's monitored remotely. If there was a mechanical issue, the sensors would detect it." Samuel bit back his frustration. Unless the sensors themselves are the problem. They had already turned away, focusing again on their screens. The young security guard who had spoken to the administrator lingered nearby, watching the exchange with interest. As Samuel turned to leave, the guard approached him. "Sir, I'm Jamal Davis." Couldn't help overhearing. "You really know about these generators?" Samuel nodded. "Worked with similar models. Military background." Jamal glanced toward the engineering team, then back to Samuel. "I was in the Army too. 4 years. 91D. Power generation equipment repairer." Samuel's interest sharpened. "Recently? Got out last year. Afghanistan." Jamal lowered his voice. "Look, I've been watching these folks for the past hour. They haven't once gone down to check the actual hardware. It's driving me crazy." "You think like I do," Samuel said, the first genuine smile crossing his face since the storm began. "The generator room's in the basement, east wing. Jamal said. Restricted access, but he tapped his security badge. I can get us in there. Samuel considered this. Your job on the line? Jamal shrugged. We've got people on ventilators upstairs. Figure my job doesn't matter much compared to that. Samuel nodded, appreciating the young man's priorities. Lead the way, then. They moved quickly through the darkened corridors, descending a maintenance stairwell away from the main hospital. Traffic. Water had begun seeping into the lower level, ankle-deep in places. They installed this system last year, Jamal explained as they waded through. Big upgrade from the old generators. Everything's computerized now. Self-diagnostics, remote monitoring, the works. More points of failure, Samuel commented. That's what I said during the training, Jamal agreed. But the vendor guys just laughed, said the system was idiot-proof. They reached a heavy metal door marked generator room, authorized personnel only. Jamal swiped his badge and entered a code. The electronic lock clicked, and he pushed the door open. The noise hit them first, the laboring whine of the backup generator struggling to maintain output, accompanied by the silence where the much larger primary generator should have been. Running. Emergency lights cast the massive room in eerie shadows, highlighting the dormant bulk of the main generator unit. Diagnostic panels along one wall displayed a cascade of red warning lights. A bank of computer screens showed various error messages and system diagrams flashing in warning colors. Samuel moved directly to the primary generator, placing his hand on its housing. Still warm but cooling, it hadn't been running for some time. When did it fail, he asked. About 3 hours ago, Jamal replied, right after the main power went out. It started up automatically, ran for maybe 20 minutes, then shut down with some kind of error code. Samuel circled the massive machine slowly, his experienced eyes scanning for obvious issues. Unlike the engineers upstairs, he ignored the blinking diagnostic panels, focusing instead on the mechanical components. They've been trying to restart it remotely, Jamal continued, but the control system keeps rejecting the commands. Samuel knelt beside the main control junction box, listening carefully to the sounds of the machine. He motioned for Jamal to be quiet, closing his eyes to focus entirely on what his ears and hands could tell him. After a long moment, he stood. Get me the paper schematics for this unit. Paper? Jamal looked confused. Everything's digital now. There will be paper backups, Samuel insisted. Fire codes and insurance requirements, probably in a documentation cabinet somewhere in this room. Jamal looked uncertain, but began searching. After a few minutes, he called out from a corner of the room, found something. He returned with a thick binder labeled Westinghouse GX 5000, Installation and Emergency Procedures. Samuel flipped through it quickly, finding the detailed technical diagrams he needed. Despite decades of technological advancement, the core principles remained the same, and so did the core vulnerabilities. I think I know what's wrong, he said just as the lights flickered again. Longer this time, but we need to hurry. Samuel spread the technical diagrams across the floor, his flashlight illuminating the detailed schematics. Jamal crouched beside him, watching intently as the older man's weathered finger traced specific pathways through the complex drawings. See this? Samuel indicated a junction point where several control lines converged. This is the primary relay assembly that connects the digital control module to the actual generator mechanics. Jamal nodded. Standard interface point. In the old days, we'd have manual bypasses for every critical electronic component, Samuel continued. Modern systems eliminated most of those as redundant, once they added all the digital monitoring. So what do you think happened? Samuel tapped the diagram. Power surge during the initial outage. These relay junctions are vulnerable. I've seen it before. The digital control module is probably fine, but it can't communicate with the generator because this relay junction is fried. But wouldn't the diagnostics detect that? Jamal asked. Samuel shook his head. That's the irony. The sensors that would report the problem are on the other side of the damaged relay. The computer can't see past the broken connection. It just knows communication is lost, like a severed nerve, Jamal said thoughtfully. Exactly. The brain doesn't know what's wrong with the hand. It just knows it can't feel or control it anymore. Samuel stood, moving to the generator's main access panel. Help me open this. Together, they removed the heavy panel, exposing the generator's internal components. Samuel played his flashlight over the complex machinery, methodically inspecting each section until he found what he was looking for. There, he said, pointing to a small black box near the control interface. That's our culprit. Jamal leaned in to look. Even to his trained eye, nothing seemed obviously wrong. How can you tell? Samuel pointed to a barely perceptible discoloration on the housing. Scorching. Subtle. But it's there. He carefully disconnected the surrounding connectors and removed the relay junction box, prying open its protective cover. Inside, the damage was immediately evident. A cluster of melted components and charred circuit traces. Catastrophic failure, Samuel confirmed. Probably happened the moment main power was lost and the system tried to switch over. The surge protection couldn't handle the load. Jamal examined the damaged component. We don't have replacements. For this, everything's special order. We don't need the exact replacement, Samuel replied. We just need to bypass this junction and create a direct connection between the control module and the generator's mechanical systems. Jamal looked skeptical. That's against every safety protocol in the manual. Safety protocols won't matter much when those ventilators stop working, Samuel said grimly. The building shuddered as a particularly violent gust of wind struck, and the lights dimmed noticeably before stabilizing at an even lower level. Samuel's radio crackled with an announcement. Attention all staff. Backup generator now at 20% capacity. Critical systems will begin failing in approximately 60 minutes. Prepare for manual ventilation procedures for all respiratory-dependent patients. Jamal's expression hardened with resolve. What do you need? Let's get back upstairs, Samuel said, tucking the damaged component into his pocket. I need to show this to the engineers and convince them to let us try a bypass. They made their way back through the flooded lower level, ascending to the command center where tension had visibly increased. Medical staff were receiving crash courses in manual ventilation techniques, while others prepared emergency lighting for critical areas. Samuel approached Tanya Williams, who was still focused, intently on her tablet. Ms. Williams, he said, holding out the damaged relay junction. I found your problem. She looked up, surprised to see him holding an actual component. Where did you get that? From the generator. It's the primary relay junction between your digital control module and the generator mechanics. Completely fried from a power surge, Tanya took the component, examining it with growing recognition. This shouldn't have failed. It has surge protection built in. Theory versus reality, Samuel said simply. The point is, this is why your control systems can't communicate with the generator. Your diagnostics can't see past this point because the sensors themselves are cut off. One of the younger engineers peered over Tanya's shoulder. He's right. That would explain why we're not getting any mechanical feedback data. How did you even know to look for this? Tanya asked, her tone shifting from dismissive to cautiously respectful. Because I've seen it before, Samuel replied. Different equipment, same principle. When sophisticated systems fail, it's often at the simplest junction points. The hospital administrator approached, drawn by the conversation. You've identified the problem? Samuel nodded. Yes, sir, but fixing it is another matter. There's no replacement part available. Then we're still stuck, Tanya said, deflating. Not necessarily, Samuel countered. We can bypass the relay junction entirely. Create a direct connection between the control module and the generator's mechanical systems. Tanya's eyes widened. That would violate at least 6 safety protocols and void the warranty. I think that's the least of our concerns right now, the administrator interjected, gesturing toward the monitor showing rapidly declining power reserves. Dr. Marcus joined the group, his scrubs now wrinkled from hours of emergency work. What's the situation? The administrator summarized quickly. Mr. Reynolds has identified the hardware failure. He's proposing a bypass solution, but it's unorthodox. Marcus looked at Samuel with new respect. Would it work? In theory, Tanya answered, before Samuel could speak. But it's dangerous. Without the proper safety cutoffs, we could damage the entire system permanently or worse. And if we do nothing? Marcus pressed. Tanya's silence was answer enough. I need components, Samuel said, opening his canvas bag. I have some basics, but I'll need more to make this work. The administrator nodded to Tanya. Give him whatever he needs. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'll have my team gather supplies. What exactly do you need? Samuel began listing components. Wire of specific gauges, electrical tape, connectors. As he spoke, the emergency lights dimmed again, remaining at their new lower level. The backup generator's labored sound was audible even from upstairs. Tanya Williams's team gathered around as Samuel explained his bypass plan, pointing to specific sections of the technical diagrams. Their expressions ranged from skepticism to outright disbelief. "This is completely against protocol," one engineer insisted. "We can't just hotwire a multi-million-dollar generator system." "The manufacturer explicitly warns against manual bypasses," another added. "There's a reason these safety systems exist." Samuel listened patiently to their objections before responding. "I understand your concerns, but right now, those safety systems are preventing the generator from functioning at all. Our digital diagnostics would have detected a simple relay failure," a third engineer argued. "This can't be the only issue." Samuel held up the charred component. "Your diagnostics can't detect what they can't communicate with." "That's the point. This component is the gateway between your digital systems and the physical generator. With it fried, your computers are blind to everything beyond this point." Tanya examined the component again, her professional pride clearly at war with the evidence before her. "Even if you're right, creating a direct bypass without proper safety cutoffs is extremely dangerous. We could have an electrical fire, or damage the generator beyond repair, or we could restore power to 43 critical patients," Samuel countered quietly. The debate might have continued, but Dr. Patel, the hospital's chief of medicine, interrupted with an urgent update. "The backup generator's output has dropped to 15%, she announced. "We've begun manual ventilation for the most critical patients, but we don't have enough staff to maintain this indefinitely. If we don't restore power within the next 40 minutes, we will begin losing people." A heavy silence fell over the group. The stakes couldn't be clearer. Dr. Marcus stepped forward. "I think we should at least examine Mr. Reynolds' proposed solution. What exactly would this bypass entail?" Samuel spread out the diagrams again. "We create a direct connection between these control lines and the generator's ignition and regulatory systems. It won't have all the sophisticated monitoring of the original setup, but it will allow basic function, enough to power critical systems." "And if something goes wrong?" Tanya pressed. "Without the safety cutoffs, we could cause a catastrophic failure. That's why we'll add manual monitoring," Samuel explained. "The old-fashioned way, someone physically watching gauges and temperatures, ready to shut down if anything exceeds safe parameters." Jamal spoke up from beside Samuel. "I can do that part. It's what I was trained for in the Army." Tanya shook her head. "This is absurd. We're talking about jerry-rigging life-saving equipment with, what, some wire and electrical tape? Sometimes that's all you need." Samuel replied evenly. "I've kept radio equipment running in monsoon conditions with less." Dr. Patel interrupted again. "What's the alternative, Ms. Williams? Do your team have a solution that can be implemented in the next 30 minutes? Tanya looked around at her engineers, who avoided eye contact. Their sophisticated approaches had reached dead ends. "No," she admitted reluctantly. "We've tried. Every software override and remote diagnostic. Without replacement parts? Then I think we proceed with Mr. Reynolds' plan," Dr. Patel decided, under supervision, of course. Tanya straightened her shoulders. "If we're doing this, we do it." "Right. I'll need to document everything and establish some minimal safety parameters." She turned to Samuel with professional resignation. "What supplies do you need specifically?" Samuel began to answer when another voice cut in from the doorway. "You can't be serious." Everyone turned to see a man in an expensive but rumpled suit, clearly another hospital administrator, more senior than the others. "Mr. Reynolds, this is William Chambers, our Chief Operations Officer," Dr. Patel explained. Chambers surveyed the group with disbelief. "You're actually considering allowing an untrained civilian to modify our emergency power systems? Do you have any idea of the liability issues here?" "Bill, we have critical patients," and Dr. Patel began. "Who will be evacuated as soon as conditions permit," Chambers interrupted. "Meanwhile, we follow established emergency protocols. Not whatever this is." He gestured dismissively towards Samuel and the diagrams. "With respect, sir," Samuel said calmly, "waiting for evacuation may not be an option. The storm's expected to last another 8 hours at minimum. Your backup generator won't make it too." Chambers regarded Samuel with thinly veiled contempt. "And you are what?" "An electrician, former military radio operator and maintenance technician," Samuel replied evenly. "So, no formal engineering credentials? No certifications on this specific equipment?" "No, sir." Chambers turned to the group triumphantly. "Then this discussion is over. Ms. Williams, continue working with your team on approved solutions only. Security will escort Mr. Reynolds to the public shelter area." Dr. Marcus stepped forward. "Bill, I think we should at least—" "This isn't A debate, Dr. Webb, Chambers snapped. We have protocols for a reason. I won't authorize potentially dangerous modifications to critical systems by unqualified personnel. The room fell silent. Samuel made no move to argue further, recognizing the futility of challenging bureaucratic authority directly. Instead, he carefully folded the diagrams and placed them back in the binder, his weathered hands steady despite the tension. As he did so, the lights dimmed yet again, remaining at an even lower level when they stabilized. From somewhere down the hall, a monitor alarm began to sound urgently. Backup generator at 12% capacity, a voice announced over the PA system. All non-essential monitoring systems now offline. Dr. Patel looked directly at Chambers. Bill, we're running out of options. We follow protocol, Chambers insisted. Though with slightly less conviction, Samuel gathered his tools slowly, glancing at Jamal, who stood uncomfortably in his security uniform, torn between duty and what he believed was right. Dr. Marcus watched. This exchange then stepped closer to Chambers. Bill, a word in private? The two men moved to the corner of the room, their hushed conversation becoming increasingly animated. After a tense minute, they returned to the group. Chambers's expression was sour but resigned. Dr. Patel, you will personally assume all responsibility for whatever happens next. Ms. Williams, you will document everything and maintain direct supervision. Is that clear? Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and left the bay room. Dr. Patel looked at Samuel. It seems you have conditional approval, Mr. Reynolds. What do you need to get started? Samuel wasted no time. He emptied his canvas bag onto a nearby table, revealing a collection of tools and materials that looked woefully inadequate for the task at hand. A multi-tool, electrical tape, a small coil of copper wire, various connectors, and a metal ballpoint pen. Tanya stared at the modest collection. That's it? That's all you brought? For starters, Samuel replied, unperturbed. We'll need more. Heavy gauge copper wire, at least 20 feet. Electrical tape, the good kind, rated for high voltage. Wire strippers, needle nose pliers, and, if you've got it, some heat shrink tubing. Tanya nodded to one of her engineers who hurried off to gather the requested items. What's the pen for? Dr. Marcus asked, eyeing the ordinary ballpoint. Samuel picked it up. This is surprisingly useful. The metal barrel is excellent conductor material, and the plastic components make good insulators in a pinch. He disassembled it with practiced ease, separating the components and setting them aside. You never know which part might save a life. As the engineers gathered the additional supplies, Samuel spread out the generator schematics again, marking specific connection points with a pencil. The plan is straightforward, he explained to Tanya and Dr. Patel. We're going to create a direct bridge between the digital control module and the generator's mechanical systems, bypassing the damaged relay junction entirely. Won't that overload the control module? One of the engineers asked. It might under normal circumstances, Samuel agreed, but we're not looking for perfect operation. Just enough to power critical systems until the storm passes. The engineer who'd been sent for supplies returned, arms full of materials. Samuel nodded approvingly as he inspected each item. This will work, he said, sorting the components into an organized layout. Now we need to get back to the generator room. Tanya gathered 3 of her team. We'll all go. I want multiple eyes on this process. As they prepared to head downstairs, the hospital PA system crackled again. Attention all staff. Backup generator now at 10% capacity. Estimated 30 minutes of critical power remaining. All available medical personnel report to ICU and respiratory care units for manual ventilation duty. Dr. Patel's expression tightened. We're moving staff from other departments to assist with manual ventilation, but we can only maintain that for a limited time before exhaustion sets in. Samuel nodded, understanding the urgency. We'll move quickly. The group made their way back to the generator room, now with more flooding than before. Water sloshed around their ankles as they approached the massive primary generator. First step, Samuel directed. We need to completely isolate the generator from the grid to prevent any feedback when we restore power. Ms. Williams, can your team handle that? Tanya nodded, dispatching 2 engineers to the main breaker panels. Jamal, I need you to remove the access panel on the control interface, the one on the right side. As Jamal worked, Samuel turned to the remaining engineers. We'll need to identify the primary control lines from the digital module. According to the schematic, they should be color-coded. Red for power, blue for ignition control, yellow for throttle regulation. One of the younger engineers, who had been among the most skeptical upstairs, leaned in to look. They changed the color scheme in the newer models. Power is still red, but ignition is green now, and throttle is orange. Samuel nodded appreciatively. Good catch, thank you. The engineer seemed surprised by the acknowledgement, then returned a small smile. I'm Lisa, by the way. Lisa Chen. Glad to have you on board, Lisa, Samuel replied. Working together, they identified the critical connection points. Samuel's hands moved with practiced precision despite their age and the arthritis that occasionally made his fingers stiff. He stripped wires, twisted connections, and tested continuity with a multimeter Lisa had brought along. We're isolating an existing relay path here, Samuel explained as he worked. Normally, these control signals would pass through multiple safety gates before reaching the mechanical systems. We're creating a more direct route, like bypassing a series of checkpoints, Lisa observed. Exactly. Less secure, but faster and simpler. Tanya watched closely, documenting each step with her tablet's camera. We should still implement some basic safety cutoffs, she insisted. At minimum, an emergency shutdown procedure. Already planned for, Samuel assured her, pointing to a specific connection he was preparing. This will be our manual kill switch. If anything goes wrong, we disconnect here and the whole system shuts down instantly. As they worked, Samuel's radio broadcast another update. Backup generator efficiency now at 7%. Critical systems beginning to fail in pediatric ICU. Manual operations implemented. The news added urgency to their already hurried work. Samuel's hands moved faster, his decades of experience evident in every precise movement. Where modern technicians might rely on specialized tools, he improvised, using the pen casing as an insulator around exposed wires, fashioning connectors from spare parts. This is either brilliant or insane, Tanya muttered, watching him work. Sometimes they're the same thing, Samuel replied without looking up. In Vietnam, we called it combat engineering, using whatever you have to solve the problem in front of you. Lisa helped hold components in place as Samuel secured connections. They don't teach us this in engineering school, she remarked. No. They teach you the right way to do things with the right equipment, Samuel said. This is the wrong way to do things when the right way isn't an option. After 20 minutes of intensive work, the bypass assembly was nearly complete. A jury-rigged but potentially functional connection that linked the generator's digital brain directly to its mechanical heart. Samuel stood back, wiping sweat from his brow despite the room's chill. That should do it. Now comes the moment of truth. The lights flickered ominously, dimming further than before. The backup generator's whine had become a labored rattle. Backup systems at 5%, came the announcement. Critical failure imminent. Samuel looked at Tanya. We're out of time. Are you ready to try? She took a deep breath, looking at the improvised bypass with professional doubt battling against desperate hope. Let's do it. The generator room fell silent except for the struggling whine of the backup generator and the gentle sloshing of floodwater around their feet. All eyes focused on Samuel as he made final adjustments to his improvised bypass. Jamal, I need you at the manual gauge panel, Samuel directed. You'll be our eyes on the internal temperatures and pressures. Jamal positioned himself by the analog gauges, old-fashioned dial indicators that operated independently of the digital systems. Lisa, you'll monitor the connection points for any signs of overheating or arcing. The young engineer nodded. Flashlight ready. Ms. Williams, I'll need you to initiate the startup sequence from your tablet. The command should still reach the digital control module, which will now communicate directly through our bypass. Tanya positioned herself with her tablet, fingers poised over the virtual controls. Ready when you are. Samuel took a deep breath. Despite his outward calm, he felt the weight of 43 lives hanging on his improvised solution. His arthritic fingers completed one final check of each connection point. All right, he said finally. Let's bring her to life. Ms. Williams, initiate startup sequence. Tanya tapped the commands into her tablet. The generator remained silent. No response, she reported, the disappointment evident in her voice. Samuel wasn't surprised. Try again. Sometimes the digital handshake takes a moment with a new configuration. Tanya repeated the startup command. Again, nothing happened. The backup generator's output dropped further, emergency lights dimming to a ghostly glow. The PA system crackled. Critical systems failing in North Wing ICU. Manual ventilation now in effect for all respiratory patients. Samuel moved quickly to the generator's main control panel. The digital signals are getting lost somewhere. We need to go more direct. He pointed to a specific junction in his bypass. Lisa, hand me the heavier gauge wire. Working rapidly, Samuel modified his approach, creating an even more direct connection between the control module and the generator's ignition system. This bypasses even more safety protocols, he warned. But it should work. He stepped back. Try again, Ms. Williams. Tanya initiated the startup sequence a third time. The generator remained stubbornly silent, but Samuel detected a faint clicking sound from the ignition system. It's trying, he said. The signal's getting through, but something's still blocking full engagement. He closed his eyes, listening carefully to the subtle sounds of the machine, his hands resting lightly on the housing to feel for vibrations. Decades of experience had taught him that machines often told you what was wrong if you knew how to listen. The ignition circuit is engaging, but the fuel system isn't responding, he diagnosed. We need to check the fuel solenoid. He moved to another section of the generator, removing an access panel to reveal a complex array of valves and control mechanisms. After a moment's inspection, he identified the problem. The electronic fuel solenoid is locked in the closed position, he announced. The safety protocol is preventing fuel flow because it can't verify system integrity. Can we bypass that too? Lisa asked. Samuel nodded. Yes, but it's riskier. We'd be removing another layer of protection. Tanya checked her tablet, which displayed the rapidly declining output of the backup generator. We don't have a choice. The backup system is failing fast. All right. Samuel gathered more materials from their supply pile. I need the thinnest gauge wire and that small spring from my toolkit. Working with the precision of a surgeon, Samuel created a delicate bypass for the fuel solenoid, essentially tricking it into an open position while maintaining some control over fuel flow. This should allow fuel to reach the ignition chamber while still giving us basic regulation, he explained. Not ideal, but it should work. As he completed the bypass, Jamal called out, "Backup generator output down to 3%. We've got minutes, not hours." Samuel finished securing the last connection. That's it, Ms. Williams, try again. Tanya initiated the startup sequence for the fourth time. A mechanical clicking sound emanated from the generator, followed by a deeper mechanical groan, the sound of internal components engaging after hours of silence. It's responding, Lisa called out. The massive generator shuddered, then produced a coughing sound as the engine attempted to fire. For a moment it seemed like it might catch. Then it died again. Damn, Samuel muttered. So close. He moved back to the ignition system, examining the connections. The fuel is reaching the chamber, but the ignition timing is off. We need to adjust the synchronization. Working purely by feel and sound now, Samuel made a subtle adjustment to his bypass circuit, shifting the timing relationship between the ignition signal and the fuel delivery. Once more, he instructed. Tanya initiated the sequence again. The generator coughed, groaned, and then, with a sound like a thunderclap in the confined space, the massive engine fired. It ran roughly, belching smoke from an exhaust port, but it was running. We've got ignition, Lisa shouted over the noise. The generator's operation was far from smooth. It rattled and shook, struggling to find a stable rhythm. Jamal called out, readings from the gauge panel, RPMs rising but unstable, oil pressure building, temperature within normal range. Samuel moved quickly between different sections of the generator, making real-time adjustments to his bypass connections, fine-tuning the impromptu system. His ear remained close to the engine housing, listening intently to its mechanical voice. She's running too rich, he diagnosed. Too much fuel, not enough air. He adjusted another connection. Listen for the change in pitch. As he made the adjustment, the generator's roar modulated, becoming slightly higher in tone and more consistent in rhythm. That's better, he said. Jamal, readings? RPM stabilizing. All gauges moving into operational range. Tanya watched her tablet with growing amazement as indicators began to change. The primary distribution system is registering power input. It's working. The emergency lights stopped their dimming cycle and began to brighten slightly. Throughout the hospital, essential systems that had been failing now stabilized. Samuel continued to make minor adjustments, his experienced ear guiding him more than any modern diagnostic could. With each small change, the generator's operation became smoother, its output more consistent. How's it looking, Ms. Williams? He asked, not taking his eyes off his work. Tanya studied her readings. Power output at 60% of normal and climbing slowly. It's not perfect, but It's enough. Samuel finished for her. Lisa stared at the improvised bypass with professional awe. I can't believe that actually worked. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best, Samuel replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. Now we need to monitor it constantly. This setup doesn't have the safety redundancies of the original system. Jamal maintained his position at the gauge panel. Everything's holding steady. We've got power. The PA system crackled to life with a new announcement. Attention all staff. Primary power partially restored. Critical systems now stable. Continue. Emergency protocols until further notice. For the first time in hours, Samuel allowed himself a small smile. The generator wasn't running perfectly, but it was running. And that meant people would live who might otherwise have died. We're not done yet, he cautioned the group. This is a temporary solution. The bypass needs constant monitoring and adjustment. Tanya nodded, a new respect evident in her expression. We'll set up a rotation. My team can handle it from here. Samuel shook his head. I'll stay. This system is temperamental. It needs someone who can read its moods. No one argued with him. They had all witnessed what his experience and intuition had accomplished when their sophisticated technology had failed. The generator room had transformed into an impromptu command center. Samuel sat on an overturned crate near his bypass assembly, making periodic adjustments as he monitored the generator's performance. Jamal remained at the gauge panel, calling out readings every 15 minutes. Tanya and Lisa had established a makeshift monitoring station, their tablets and computers now displaying limited data from the partially restored systems. 2 hours had passed since the generator's successful restart. The machine continued to run with a rough, imperfect rhythm that nonetheless maintained a consistent power output. Temperature holding at 180 degrees, Jamal reported. Oil pressure steady at 58 psi. Samuel nodded, his trained ear catching subtle variations in the engine's sound. He made a minor adjustment to one of his bypass connections, and the generator's tone evened out slightly. How does it know? Lisa asked, watching him work. I mean, how do you know what to adjust just by listening? Samuel smiled. Machines talk if you learn their language. This one's telling me the fuel mixture is still a bit rich. Hear that? Paused, letting them listen to a specific harmonic in the generator's roar. That's fuel burning inefficiently in the exhaust cycle. Lisa shook her head in amazement. They don't teach that in engineering school. No amount of digital monitoring can replace human senses and experience, Samuel replied. Your instruments tell you what they're programmed to measure. Your senses can pick up things no one thought to program for. The door to the generator room opened, admitting Dr. Patel and Dr. Marcus. They approached with expressions of cautious optimism. Mr. Reynolds, Dr. Patel began, I wanted to personally thank you. All critical systems are now stable. You've quite literally saved lives today. Samuel acknowledged her words with a simple nod. How are the patients? Stable, Dr. Marcus replied. We had some close calls in pediatric ICU when the backup systems were failing, but everyone pulled through. He looked at the jury-rigged bypass with a mixture of awe and disbelief. I still can't believe this worked. How long will it hold? Dr. Patel asked, addressing both Samuel and Tanya. Samuel answered first. Hard to say. The bypass is handling the load for now, but it's not designed for prolonged operation. Components will heat up, connections may degrade. I'd estimate 12 to 24 hours before we start seeing significant issues, Tanya added, her professional assessment aligning with Samuel's. We're running well above recommended temperatures for several components. The storm? Samuel asked. Still severe, but meteorologists say the worst has passed, Dr. Marcus informed him. Wind speeds are decreasing, though flooding remains significant. Emergency services estimate they might attempt helicopter evacuations for critical patients by tomorrow morning if conditions continue to improve. Samuel nodded, making another slight adjustment as the generator's rhythm faltered momentarily. This will hold until then, as long as we keep babysitting it. Dr. Patel turned to Tanya. Ms. Williams, please ensure your team documents this entire setup. When communications are restored, we'll want manufacturer representatives to understand exactly what happened and how Mr. Reynolds' solution worked. Tanya was already photographing and recording the bypass from multiple angles. Already on it. This is unprecedented. Bypassing digital controls to create a direct mechanical interface. It violates every protocol, but she gestured at the functioning generator. Results speak for themselves. William Chambers appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. He approached slowly, taking in the improvised bypass and the now functioning generator. Dr. Patel tells me your modification was successful, he said to Samuel, his tone carefully neutral. It's keeping the lights on. Samuel replied simply. Chambers nodded stiffly. Then it appears I owe you an apology, Mr. Reynolds. Your unorthodox approach has indeed proven effective when our standard procedures failed. The admission clearly didn't come easily to him, and Samuel acknowledged it with a respectful nod. Sometimes experience trumps procedure, he said without rubbing it in. Yes, well, Chambers straightened his tie. I've contacted our insurance representatives. They've authorized emergency measures given the circumstances, so liability concerns are mitigated. Of course, that would be his primary concern, Samuel thought but didn't say. The generator suddenly coughed and stuttered, its rhythm breaking. Everyone tensed as the lights flickered momentarily. Samuel moved immediately to his bypass assembly, identifying the issue with practiced ease. Fuel flow fluctuation. Likely debris in the line from sitting dormant. His hands worked quickly, adjusting a connection. There, the generator stabilized, returning to its rough but functional operation. The incident served as a stark reminder of how precarious their solution remained. This system needs constant monitoring, Samuel emphasized. Someone who understands the mechanical aspects needs to be here at all times. Tanya stepped forward. I'll arrange a rotation schedule for my team. We've been taking notes on your adjustments, Mr. Reynolds. Samuel nodded approvingly. Good. The more eyes and ears on this, the better our chances of maintaining output until the storm passes. As the group discussed logistics, Jamal approached. Samuel, with a cup of coffee scrounged from somewhere in the hospital. Thought you could use this, sir, he said, handing over the steaming cup. Samuel accepted it gratefully, suddenly aware of his exhaustion. He'd been running on adrenaline and determination since leaving his house hours ago. Thank you, son, he said, taking a sip of the bitter hospital coffee that nonetheless tasted wonderful at that moment. Jamal lowered his voice. Just between us, sir. What you did here, that was some of the most impressive troubleshooting I've ever seen. Reminded me of my old sergeant in Afghanistan. Guy could fix a generator with dental floss and chewing gum if he had to. Samuel smiled. Necessity breeds innovation. Your sergeant sounds like my kind of soldier. He would have said the same about you, Jamal replied with genuine respect. The others continued their discussion of duty rotations and monitoring protocols. Samuel sipped his coffee and kept one ear tuned to the generator's operation. The machine ran imperfectly. Rattling, vibrating, occasionally coughing, but it ran. Sometimes, he reflected, that was all you could ask for. Not perfection, but functionality when it mattered most. His improvised solution might offend engineering sensibilities and violate safety protocols, but it was keeping heart monitors running, ventilators breathing, and critical medications refrigerated. In the end, results were what mattered, not the elegance of the path to achieve them. 4 hours after the successful restart, Samuel sat in a plastic chair beside the generator, his weathered hands occasionally reaching out to make minor adjustments to his bypass assembly. The initial excitement had faded into a steady routine of monitoring and maintenance. Tanya's engineering team had established shifts with someone always present to learn from Samuel's methods. The generator continued to run with the same imperfect rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that was irregular, but persistent. Like an old soldier, Samuel thought. Not pretty, but reliable when it counted. Dr. Marcus entered the generator room with a tray holding sandwiches and coffee. Thought you could use some sustenance, he said, setting it down on a makeshift table. Much appreciated, Samuel replied, suddenly aware of his hunger. He hadn't eaten since before leaving his house, which felt like days ago now. Marcus pulled up another chair. The evacuation plans are proceeding. Emergency Services believes they can get helicopters in by early morning if the wind continues to decrease. They'll prioritize critical care patients. Samuel nodded, taking a bite of the sandwich. Good. This setup will hold until then, but I wouldn't trust it much longer. That's what Ms. Williams said. She estimates the bypass might begin to degrade within 12 to 24 hours due to heat stress on the components. She's right, Samuel confirmed. We're running without proper cooling cycles or safety cutoffs. Components are operating well beyond their design parameters. Marcus studied the improvised bypass with newfound respect. You know, when I saw you in the grocery store yesterday, I honestly thought you were just another stubborn old-timer refusing to evacuate. Samuel chuckled. I was. Still am. But you're also the reason 43 people are still alive right now, Marcus continued. including a 6-year-old girl on a ventilator who wouldn't have survived manual breathing for long. Samuel's expression softened. "How is she?" "Stable," Marcus replied. "Her name is Lily. Severe asthma attack complicated by pneumonia. When the power started failing, we almost lost her. The manual ventilation was barely keeping her oxygenated." He paused. "Her parents are calling you a miracle worker." Samuel shook his head. "No miracles here. Just old-fashioned problem-solving. That's becoming a lost art," Marcus observed. "You diagnosed in minutes what our entire engineering team couldn't figure out with all their advanced equipment." Samuel took a sip of coffee before responding. "Digital systems are powerful tools, but they're just that. Tools. They're designed to solve anticipated problems through predetermined pathways. When something falls outside those parameters, they fail," Marcus finished. "They become limited," Samuel corrected. "Every tool has its purpose and its limitations. The problem isn't the tool. It's forgetting that humans need to understand what's underneath." Tanya Williams entered, carrying a tablet displaying various readings. She had been skeptical of Samuel's methods initially, but professional respect had replaced her doubt. "Power output remains steady at 65%, she reported. "We're prioritizing critical systems and rotating power to different sections of the hospital to reduce strain on the generator." "Smart approach," Samuel approved. Tanya sat down across from them. "I've been documenting everything about this bypass for the manufacturer. They're not going to believe this worked." "But it did," Marcus pointed out. "Yes," she admitted, "and that raises questions about our over-reliance on digital control systems with no manual alternatives." She looked directly at Samuel. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Reynolds. I dismissed your expertise because it didn't come with the right credentials." "No apology needed," Samuel replied. "You were doing your job the way you were trained. That's just it," she said. "We're trained to trust the diagnostics implicitly. When they fail," she gestured toward the generator, "we become helpless." The generator coughed momentarily, its rhythm faltering. Samuel rose immediately, adjusting a connection with practiced ease. The machine settled back into its steady operation. "How do you know exactly what to adjust?" Tanya asked, watching him work. "Experience," Samuel replied simply. "And listening. Every machine has its own voice, its own way of telling you what's wrong." "I've been an engineer for 12 years, Tanya said. "I can read diagnostic outputs and troubleshoot software issues, but what you're doing," she shook her head. "It's like watching someone speak a language I've only read about in books." Samuel smiled. "It's not magic, just a different kind of knowledge, one that comes from working with equipment when you don't have computers to tell you what's wrong." The PA system crackled with an announcement. "Attention all staff. Emergency services reports conditions improving. Helicopter evacuation scheduled to begin at 0600 hours. Priority patients are being prepared for transport." Marcus checked his watch. "That's 4 hours from now. Will this hold that long?" Samuel nodded. "As long as we keep monitoring and adjusting. The real question is how long after that, for the remaining patients and staff. The National Guard is bringing in mobile generators," Tanya informed them. "Expected arrival by noon tomorrow, assuming roads become passable. Then we just need to keep this running until reinforcements arrive," Samuel said, his tone matter-of-fact. As they discussed logistics, Jamal entered to relieve the engineer monitoring the gauges. He approached Samuel with a fresh cup of coffee. "Thought you could use a refill, sir," he said, exchanging the empty cup for the full one. "Thank you, son," Samuel replied, grateful for the gesture. Jamal lowered his voice. "The staff upstairs are talking about you, calling you the hurricane hero and stuff like that." Samuel winced slightly. "Just doing what needed doing. People don't do that much anymore," Jamal observed. "Most just wait for someone else to fix things." Samuel took a sip of coffee, contemplating this. Maybe that's the real problem with all our technology. Makes it too easy to wait for the experts instead of trying to understand things ourselves. The generator sputtered again. Longer this time. Samuel was on his feet instantly, his fatigue forgotten as he made adjustments to several connection points. The machine stabilized, but the incident highlighted the precarious nature of their solution. "I should stay here," Samuel decided. "Full time until the evacuations are complete." No one argued. They had all witnessed how his intuitive understanding of the machinery had made the difference between success and failure. Credentials and protocols had their place, but in this crisis, Samuel's hands-on experience had proven irreplaceable. As dawn approached, the generator room had become an impromptu gathering place. Samuel remained at his post, vigilantly monitoring. His creation, but he was no longer alone. Hospital staff on breaks wandered in, curious to see the legendary bypass that had saved so many lives. Each visitor brought stories from different departments, of close calls averted, of critical treatments maintained, of hope restored when all seemed lost. Dr. Patel arrived with a group of medical residents, all eager to see the mechanical miracle for themselves. The generator continued its imperfect but vital operation, powering essential systems throughout the building. The first evacuation helicopters have been cleared for approach, Dr. Patel announced. They'll be here within the hour. We're prepping the most critical patients now. Samuel nodded, making another small adjustment to his bypass. The connection points had begun to show signs of heat stress, but the system continued to function. How long can we keep this running? Dr. Patel asked. 8 more hours, maybe 12 if we're lucky, Samuel replied honestly. The components weren't designed for this kind of continuous duty without proper cooling and isolation. One of the younger residents raised her hand tentatively. Is it true you made this with just a pen and some wire? Samuel smiled. Among other things, yes. Sometimes the simplest tools are all you need. How did you learn to do something like this? Another resident asked. Samuel settled back in his chair, sensing their genuine interest. For the first time, he began to share the experiences that had prepared him for this moment. Vietnam, 1968, he began. I was a radio operator with the 25th Infantry. Our unit was deep in the jungle when our communication equipment failed during monsoon season. The room grew quiet as staff gathered around. Drawn to the story, we were cut off, surrounded by hostile territory, with no way to call for extraction or air support. The radio diagnostics showed nothing wrong. All indicator lights were green, but we couldn't transmit or receive. Samuel's hands, resting momentarily from their adjustments, mimicked the movements from 50 years earlier. Our tech specialist insisted nothing was wrong. The diagnostics said so. But I opened up the unit anyway and found water had seeped into a junction box, creating a short circuit that the diagnostics couldn't detect because it was beyond the sensor network. Jamal, still at his post by the gauge panel, nodded in understanding. Same principle as here. Exactly, Samuel confirmed. I bypassed the damaged section using wire from our field repair kit and parts salvaged from a damaged headset. Wasn't pretty, but within an hour we were back in communication. That radio got 26 men home alive. So you've been doing this kind of thing your whole life, Dr. Marcus observed, having joined the group. When necessary, Samuel replied. After the war, I worked maintenance for a while, including here at this hospital back in the 70s. Systems were simpler then, more mechanical. You could see how things connected, how they worked together. Not, like today, Tanya interjected. Modern systems are black boxes inside black boxes. Even we engineers only understand our specific subsystems. Samuel nodded. That's the trade-off. We gained sophistication and automation but lost transparency and basic understanding. It's the same in medicine, one of the senior doctors commented. Young doctors rely so heavily on imaging and lab results that some are losing the ability to diagnose with their hands and eyes and ears. Progress isn't the problem, Samuel clarified. It's forgetting the fundamentals. Technology should enhance human capabilities, not replace human understanding. Lisa, who had returned for her shift monitoring the bypass, joined the conversation. In engineering school, we spend more time learning software interfaces than understanding the physical principles behind them. I couldn't have done what you did. Not yet, Samuel corrected her. But you could learn. The principles haven't changed, just the interfaces we use to interact with them. The generator coughed, its rhythm faltering momentarily. Samuel was on his feet instantly, adjusting a connection that had begun to overheat. The machine settled back into its operation. See that? He said to Lisa. Heard the change in pitch before the vibration pattern shifted. The machine tells you. It's struggling if you know how to listen. Lisa moved closer, watching intently. What am I listening for? The harmonics in the engine sound, Samuel explained. A healthy generator has a consistent undertone. When that changes, something's wrong. He guided her hand to rest lightly on the housing. Feel that vibration pattern? That's normal. If it develops a secondary rhythm, a sort of counterbeat, that's fuel delivery problems. Other engineers gathered around, suddenly eager to learn what their digital interfaces couldn't tell them. Samuel demonstrated how to diagnose different issues using senses rather than sensors. identifying patterns in sound, vibration, even smell that indicated specific problems. In Vietnam, we had a saying, Samuel told them. When the meters lie, trust your eyes. Modern equivalent might be, when the software fails, use your senses. As he spoke, the distant sound of helicopter rotors became audible. The first evacuation, choppers approaching. They're earlier than expected, Dr. Patel observed with relief. Weather must be improving faster than predicted. The news energized the room. Staff began dispersing to prepare for the evacuations, but several engineers remained, continuing to learn from Samuel's impromptu masterclass in mechanical troubleshooting. You should document this, Tanya suggested. These techniques, they're not in any of our manuals or training. Wouldn't fit well in a technical manual, Samuel replied with a slight smile. Can't reduce experience to bullet points. But you could teach, she persisted. Consult. Share what you know before. She trailed off, realizing the implication. Before old-timers like me are gone, Samuel finished, not offended. Maybe so. The idea seemed to take root in his mind as he continued, his vigilant monitoring. Perhaps there was value in the old ways, not as replacements for modern technology, but as complementary knowledge, insurance against the inevitable failures of complex systems. As hospital staff prepared for evacuations above, Samuel Reynolds continued his quiet vigil beside the generator, his weathered hands making the small, crucial adjustments that kept hope alive throughout the building. Each time the machine faltered, he responded with the practiced precision of someone who understood not just how to operate technology, but how it fundamentally worked. Hurricane Eliza's eye passed over Port Haven just after dawn, bringing an eerie calm to the devastated town. The sudden silence after hours of howling wind was almost disorienting. Sunlight broke through in pale shafts between dissipating clouds, illuminating a landscape transformed by wind and water. In the generator room, Samuel took advantage of the lull to make more substantial adjustments to his bypass assembly. The yaw components had been running hot for hours, and signs of stress were becoming more evident. Discolored wire insulation, connection points beginning to oxidize, the smell of electronics operating beyond their design parameters. How's it looking? Tanya asked, returning from coordinating with the evacuation teams upstairs. Holding, Samuel replied, not sugarcoating the situation. But deteriorating. I'd give it 6 more hours at most before critical failure. She nodded, having expected this assessment. The first 3 helicopters have already departed with the most critical patients. 2 more are loading now, and the National Guard's mobile generators? On their way. Roads are still blocked in many areas, but they're making progress. Estimated arrival by early afternoon. Samuel made another adjustment to compensate for a weakening connection. That should work. We just need to baby this system for a few more hours. The radio at Tanya's hip crackled to life. Engineering, this is Memorial Hospital. We're experiencing generator failures similar to Port Haven's. Do you have any information that might help us stabilize our systems? Tanya looked at Samuel, who nodded. She keyed her radio. This is Williams at Port Haven. We identified a fried relay junction in the primary control interface. We've implemented a temporary bypass. Can you talk us through it? The voice requested urgently. Tanya handed the radio to Samuel. You're the expert. Samuel took the radio, considering how to explain his improvised solution concisely. This is Samuel Reynolds at Port Haven. What model generator are you running? Westinghouse GX 4000, came the reply. Slightly older than yours, but similar architecture. Good, Samuel said. First step is to locate your primary relay junction box between the digital control module and the mechanical systems. It's likely suffered power surge damage. For the next 20 minutes, Samuel talked the distant hospital through a simplified version of his bypass procedure, adapting his instructions for their specific equipment and the parts they had available. Jamal assisted by sketching diagrams that Tanya photographed and sent to the other facility. Remember, Samuel emphasized, this is a temporary solution only. It requires constant monitoring and adjustment. Understood. The voice replied, We're proceeding with the bypass now. We'll report back. As Samuel handed the radio back to Tanya, Dr. Marcus entered with news. The storm's intensity has dropped significantly, he reported. Eye wall has completely passed over. We're getting the trailing edge now, but it's much weaker. Roads? Samuel asked, thinking of the promised National Guard generators. Still largely impassable, but emergency crews are clearing main routes. They've prioritized access to medical facilities. Samuel nodded, turning his attention back to the generator, which had begun to make a new, concerning sound, a slight whine overlaying its usual operation. That doesn't sound good, Jamal observed from his position at the gauges. Bearing stress, Samuel diagnosed, listening carefully. The shaft assembly is running hot from prolonged operation without proper cooling cycles. He adjusted his bypass to reduce load slightly, sacrificing some power output to extend operational life. The generator's tone shifted, the concerning whine diminishing but not disappearing entirely. We're running out of tricks, he admitted to the others. This machine needs proper maintenance, not more jury rigging. Tanya's radio crackled again. Port Haven, this is Memorial. Bypass implementation successful. Primary power restored to critical systems, thank you. A cheer went up from the engineering team gathered in the generator room. The success at the neighboring hospital provided a much-needed morale boost. Your instructions just saved another facility, Tanya told Samuel. They have over 30 critical care patients. Samuel acknowledged this with a modest nod, but his attention remained fixed on his increasingly temperamental creation. The bypass had far exceeded his initial expectations, but it was reaching its limits. Ms. Williams, he said, we should prepare contingency plans for when, not if, this system fails before the National Guard arrives. She nodded grimly. We've consolidated all remaining critical patients to 2 wards to minimize power requirements. Emergency Services has prioritized their evacuation in the next helicopter wave. Good, Samuel approved. And backup plans for those backup plans? Manual systems prepped and ready, she confirmed. Staff assigned in shifts for manual ventilation, if necessary. Samuel smiled slightly. You're learning to think in redundancies, that's good. A lesson from today I won't forget, she replied sincerely. As they spoke, Jamal approached with a notepad. Mr. Reynolds, I've been documenting your bypass procedure step by step. I thought it might help other facilities if they experience similar failures. Samuel examined the young man's detailed notes and diagrams with appreciation. This is excellent work, son. Very thorough. I figured someone should record exactly how you did this, Jamal explained. Too important to lose. Knowledge should be shared, Samuel agreed, especially practical knowledge like this. The conversation was interrupted by Lisa, who entered the generator room with excitement. The radio reports are coming in from all over the county. 3 other hospitals and 2 nursing homes have implemented Mr. Reynolds' bypass procedure. After hearing about it through emergency channels, it's working everywhere. Samuel looked surprised. They're implementing it based on radio descriptions? Your instructions were clear enough that other engineers could adapt them to their systems, Tanya explained. We're sending Jamal's diagrams through emergency channels to help. For the first time since the crisis began, Samuel felt something beyond the immediate pressure of keeping the generator running. A sense that his knowledge, often dismissed as outdated, was proving vital across the entire region. Dr. Patel entered with more news. Evacuation of critical patients is 70% complete. National Guard reports they're approximately 90 minutes out with mobile power stations. Perfect timing, Samuel said, indicating his increasingly unstable bypass. This setup won't last much longer. As if to emphasize his point, the generator shuddered, its rhythm faltering noticeably before his quick adjustment stabilized it again. How do you do that? Lisa asked, watching his hands move with such certainty. Practice, Samuel replied simply, and listening to what the machine is telling you. Outside, the storm's trailing edge continued to weaken. Through the small windows high in the generator room wall, patches of blue sky became visible between racing clouds. The worst had passed, both meteorologically and mechanically. Samuel's improvised solution had bridged the critical gap, keeping power flowing during the most dangerous hours of the hurricane. Now, as help approached and evacuation procedures continued smoothly, he allowed himself to acknowledge what he and the others had accomplished, not just preserving lives but demonstrating the enduring value of practical knowledge and hands-on problem-solving in an increasingly digital world. By late afternoon, Hurricane Eliza had moved inland, diminishing, to a tropical storm as it traveled northward. At Port Haven Medical Center, the National Guard had arrived with mobile generators, professional technicians, and emergency supplies. The hospital buzzed with activity as power systems were transferred from Samuel's improvised bypass to the standardized regulation-compliant temporary generators. Samuel stood in the corner of the generator room, watching as uniformed technicians disconnected his creation with careful precision, documenting each step of the bypass for their reports. His weathered hands, which had maintained the delicate balance of the system for nearly 12 hours, now rested at his sides, their job complete. The primary generator had run for 11 hours and 47 minutes on his improvised bypass, far longer than anyone, including Samuel himself, had expected. It had finally failed 20 minutes before the National Guard's arrival, but by then all critical patients had been evacuated, and the remaining staff and patients had weathered the brief blackout with emergency protocols. Mr. Reynolds. Tanya approached, accompanied by a National Guard lieutenant. Lieutenant Cooper would like to speak with you. The young officer extended his hand. Sir, I've been reviewing the reports of what you accomplished here. Our technical team is, well, they're frankly amazed. What you built violated about a dozen safety protocols, but it saved this hospital. Samuel shook the offered hand. Did what needed doing, that's all. It was considerably more than that, the lieutenant countered. We've received reports from 5 other medical facilities in the region that implemented variations of your bypass procedure. Conservative estimate puts the number of lives saved at over 100. Samuel absorbed this information quietly. The scope of the impact hadn't fully registered until now. We'd like to document your procedure properly, the lieutenant continued. My team has been taking detailed notes and photographs, but having your direct input would be invaluable. Before Samuel could respond, Dr. Patel entered with Dr. Marcus and several other staff members. Word had spread that Samuel was preparing to leave, and many had come to see him before he departed. Mr. Reynolds, Dr. Patel began, before you go, we wanted to properly thank you for what you've done. Samuel shook his head. No need for that, doctor. Just glad I could help. Nevertheless, she insisted, we've gathered to express our gratitude. What followed was a spontaneous ceremony of sorts. Staff members from every department approached one by one to shake his hand or share brief stories of how his actions had affected their patients. A respiratory therapist described how a premature infant on a ventilator had remained stable throughout the crisis. A surgeon recounted completing an emergency procedure that would have been impossible without power. Each story added to the weight of what had been accomplished, not just by Samuel, but by everyone who had worked together during the crisis. William Chambers approached last, his typical administrative stiffness softened by genuine respect. Mr. Reynolds, I owe you a more substantial apology than the one I offered earlier. My insistence on protocol nearly prevented the very solution we needed most. Samuel accepted this with a nod. Protocols exist for good reasons, Mr. Chambers. They're just not the only reasons. A lesson I won't soon forget, Chambers acknowledged. The hospital board has asked me to invite you to consult on our emergency preparedness revisions. We'd value your perspective on incorporating more flexible approaches. I'll consider it, Samuel replied, somewhat surprised by the offer. Dr. Marcus stepped forward. There's something else we wanted to give you before you leave. He handed Samuel a framed certificate. It's not much, but it's heartfelt. The simple document read, in recognition of extraordinary service during Hurricane Eliza, Port Haven Medical Center expresses its deepest gratitude to Samuel Reynolds, whose knowledge, courage, and ingenuity saved countless lives. Samuel accepted it with uncharacteristic emotion, clearing his throat before speaking. Thank you. I'm honored. Tanya approached with a more practical offering. We've also prepared this for you. She handed him a thumb drive. It contains all the documentation of your bypass procedure, including Jamal's excellent diagrams and notes from our team. We thought you might want a copy. For posterity, Samuel said with a slight smile, pocketing the drive. As the impromptu ceremony concluded, people began returning to their duties. The crisis had passed, but the recovery work was just beginning. Samuel gathered his few belongings, preparing to make his way home now that conditions outside had improved. Dr. Marcus walked with him toward the exit. You know, he said, when we talked in the grocery store before the hurricane, I remember thinking how resistant you seemed to modern technology. I thought you were stuck in the past. Samuel chuckled. I am in some ways, but that's precisely what saved us, Marcus continued. Your understanding of fundamental principles that don't change regardless of how sophisticated the interface becomes. Technology changes, principles don't, Samuel agreed. That's worth remembering. They reached the hospital's main entrance, where the full extent of Eliza's destruction became visible. Trees were down everywhere. Debris scattered across what had been manicured grounds, and standing water still covered much of the parking area. Are you sure you don't want to stay until conditions improve further? Marcus asked, concerned. Samuel shook his head. Need to check on my house. Besides, you folks have your hands full here without an old man underfoot. At least let me arrange transportation. Already taken care of. Samuel interrupted, pointing to where Jamal stood beside a National Guard jeep. I'm off duty now, Jamal explained as they approached. Thought I might give Mr. Reynolds a lift home if that's all right with him. Much appreciated, Samuel accepted. As they prepared to depart, Dr. Patel hurried out with one final message. Mr. Reynolds, I almost forgot. A reporter from the local news has been asking to speak with you. They're calling you the hurricane hero, apparently. Samuel winced at the title. Please tell them I'm just a stubborn old man who didn't evacuate. When he should have, Dr. Patel smiled. I'll pass that along, though I doubt it will deter them. With final handshakes and thanks, Samuel climbed into the jeep beside Jamal. As they navigated the debris-strewn streets of Port Haven, he gazed at the hurricane's aftermath with a practiced eye, assessing damage, noting what could be salvaged, evaluating what would need to be rebuilt. You know, Jamal said as they drove, what you did back there, that's going to change things. Ms. Williams was already talking about revising their training programs to include more hands-on mechanical understanding. Good, Samuel nodded. Computers are tools, not replacements for knowledge. That's what I liked about Army training, Jamal continued. They taught us the digital systems, sure, but also how to function when they failed. Most civilian technicians never learned that part. They fell into comfortable conversation about their respective military experiences. Different eras, but similar lessons. As they approached Samuel's neighborhood, the conversation shifted to more immediate concerns. Think your house survived? Jamal asked. Built it strong, Samuel replied. It'll need work, but it'll be standing. As they turned onto his street, Samuel saw he was right. His house had weathered the storm better than many of his neighbors' homes, though a large tree branch had punched through one window, and his front porch had partially collapsed. Nothing that can't be fixed, he assessed as they pulled into the driveway. Jamal surveyed the damage. Need help boarding up that window? Samuel considered the offer, then nodded. Wouldn't mind an extra pair of hands. As they gathered materials from Samuel's garage, Jamal spotted the old military footlocker in the corner. Vietnam? He asked. Yeah, Samuel confirmed. Kept my old gear all these years. Never thought I'd need that repair kit again. Good thing. You did, Jamal observed. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Good thing indeed. After Jamal departed, Samuel surveyed his property in the fading afternoon light. The hurricane had left its mark. Fallen branches, scattered debris, minor structural damage. But the house remained fundamentally sound, like himself. Samuel thought wryly. Weathered but still standing, he set about making essential repairs, securing the broken window with plywood from his garage and clearing the most dangerous debris from his yard. Physical labor felt good after hours of the intense concentration required at the hospital. His body moved with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to self-reliance, despite the protests of aging joints. As dusk approached, Samuel's battery-powered radio crackled with updates. Emergency services were establishing distribution, centers for food, water, and supplies. Power restoration was underway but expected to take days for most areas. Roads were being cleared systematically, with priority given to emergency routes. But beneath these official announcements, another story was emerging. Reports of an old-timer who had saved Port Haven Medical Center with improvised repairs when sophisticated systems had failed. The details grew increasingly elaborate with each retelling, some versions claiming he had repaired the generator using only a pocket knife and dental floss. Samuel shook his head at the exaggerations, but didn't dwell on them. Mythology always outpaced reality in crisis situations. He'd seen it before. With immediate repairs completed, Samuel sat on his back porch as darkness fell over Port Haven. The night was unusually quiet without the ambient hum of electricity that normally permeated modern life. Stars shone with remarkable clarity through the storm-cleared air, no longer competing with artificial light. The tranquility was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Headlights swept across his yard as a police cruiser pulled into his driveway. Officer Rodriguez, a local patrolman Samuel recognized from community meetings, stepped out. Mr. Reynolds, he called, approaching the porch. Glad to see you're all right. We're checking on residents who didn't evacuate, especially seniors living alone. I appreciate that, Samuel replied. As you can see, I'm managing fine. Rodriguez nodded, then hesitated. Sir, are you the Samuel Reynolds from the hospital? The one who fixed the generator? News traveled fast in small towns, especially during crises. I helped out, Samuel acknowledged simply. My sister's a nurse there, Rodriguez explained. She told me what you did. Said you saved a lot of lives. He extended his hand. I wanted to thank you personally. Samuel accepted the handshake. Just did what needed doing. Well, it mattered. Rodriguez insisted. Listen, we're establishing a community command center at the high school. It has generator power, hot food, and better information than you'll get on that radio. You'd be welcome there. Samuel considered the offer. I'm all right here for now, but I might have something to contribute. Rodriguez looked interested. How so? Samuel retrieved his hand-drawn maps of Port Haven's older infrastructure from his canvas bag. These show water mains, drainage systems, and utility layouts from when I worked maintenance. Some might not be on newer digital plans. The officer examined the maps with growing appreciation. This could be incredibly useful for the recovery teams. The GIS systems are down, and the newer guys don't know the old infrastructure. Figured as much, Samuel replied. Digital's great until it isn't. Would you be willing to bring these to the command center? Our public works director would be extremely grateful, Samuel agreed, gathering his maps and a few essentials. Despite his preference for solitude, he recognized when his knowledge might serve the broader community. The drive to the high school revealed Hurricane Eliza's full impact on Port Haven. Entire streets were transformed. Trees uprooted, power lines down, some homes severely damaged or destroyed. The familiar landscape had become alien, landmarks altered or removed entirely. Rodriguez navigated carefully around obstacles, occasionally stopping to mark hazards for emergency crews. It's going to take months to rebuild, he observed grimly. Samuel nodded. He'd seen this cycle before: destruction, recovery, reconstruction. Communities were resilient when they worked together, especially when they combined modern resources with traditional knowledge. The high school parking lot had transformed into an emergency management hub. National Guard vehicles, utility trucks, and emergency service vehicles surrounded the building. The gymnasium inside had become a temporary shelter, while classrooms served as coordination centers for different aspects of the recovery effort. Rodriguez led Samuel to a classroom where the public works team had established operations. Maps covered the walls, but most were newer digital printouts that lacked the historical details of Samuel's hand-drawn versions. Frank, this is Samuel Reynolds. Rodriguez introduced him to a harried-looking man surrounded by papers. He's got something you need to see. Samuel spread his infrastructure maps on the table. These show the older systems: water, sewer, drainage. Some might still be active or connect to newer networks. Frank's expression shifted from exhaustion to keen interest as he examined the detailed drawings. These are gold, Mr. Reynolds. Our digital records don't have half of these details, especially for the older parts of town. Other team members gathered around, asking questions about specific areas and jotting notes. Samuel found himself drawn into technical discussions, explaining the peculiarities of Port Haven's infrastructure that only long-term residents would know. The main drainage culvert under Maple Street was reinforced in '85, he explained, pointing to a section of his map. But the secondary system through Thompson Park was never upgraded. It'll be overwhelmed right now. That explains the flooding we couldn't account for, one engineer remarked. The simulation models didn't show that vulnerability. For the next several hours, Samuel worked alongside the recovery teams, translating his practical knowledge of Port Haven's systems into actionable information. His maps became central reference points, with team members continually returning to verify details or clarify questions. Your knowledge of this town is remarkable, Frank commented during a brief break. We've got all these sophisticated mapping tools and predictive models, but they're useless without the historical context you're providing. Experience has its uses, Samuel replied simply. As midnight approached, the command center received reports of a new problem. Several neighborhoods remained flooded despite receding waters elsewhere. The digital models couldn't explain the discrepancy. Samuel studied the situation maps, then tapped a specific location on his hand-drawn chart. Check the outflow regulator here. It's manually operated and gets stuck in the closed position during heavy debris events. A team was dispatched immediately. Within an hour, they reported back. The regulator had indeed been jammed by storm debris, exactly as Samuel had predicted. Once cleared, the floodwaters began receding normally. How did you know? Frank asked, amazed. Happened in '94 during a nor'easter, Samuel explained. Some things don't make it into the official reports but stick in memory. As dawn approached, Samuel found himself unexpectedly central to Port Haven's recovery planning. His maps had been photographed and integrated into the emergency response system. His knowledge of the town's hidden vulnerabilities and forgotten resources had redirected several key operations. When he finally stepped outside for some air, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Emergency vehicles continued to come and go, their lights flashing against the retreating darkness. Port Haven was wounded but responding, its recovery now guided by a fusion of modern technology and historical knowledge. Samuel found a quiet spot to watch the sunrise, the first post-hurricane dawn. The storm had cleared the air, making the colors especially vivid as light spilled across the altered landscape. He felt a deep satisfaction that transcended physical exhaustion. His lifetime of practical experience, often dismissed in the digital age, had proven its enduring value when it mattered most. 3 months after Hurricane Eliza, Port Haven gathered in the newly repaired town square for a community celebration, marking the official end of emergency recovery operations. Reconstruction would continue for years, but the essential services and infrastructure had been restored. The event combined somber remembrance for what had been lost with hopeful recognition of how the community had come together. Samuel stood at the edge of the crowd, uncomfortable with attention but unable to decline the personal invitation from Mayor Collins. He wore his one good suit, freshly pressed for the occasion, and watched as various emergency responders and community leaders received recognition for their contributions during the crisis. "And now," the mayor announced, "I'd like to recognize someone whose unique contribution changed the course of our recovery efforts. Samuel Reynolds, please join me on stage." Samuel reluctantly made his way forward as applause spread through the gathered crowd. Many knew his story by now. How he had braved the hurricane to reach the hospital, improvised a solution that kept critical systems functioning, and later provided crucial information that guided recovery operations. The mayor presented him with a simple plaque commemorating his service to Port Haven. "Mr. Reynolds reminds us all that sometimes the most valuable knowledge isn't found in computers or modern systems, but in the lifetime of practical experience carried by our senior citizens." Samuel accepted the recognition with a brief, humble nod to the crowd. He had never been comfortable with public speaking and saw no reason to start now. As he returned to his place, he passed Dr. Marcus, who clasped his shoulder warmly. "The hospital's implementation team would still like your input on those emergency preparedness revisions," he said. "Whenever you're ready." Samuel nodded. "I'll stop by next week." The ceremony concluded with the mayor unveiling plans for a more resilient Port Haven, infrastructure improvements designed to better withstand future storms. Samuel noted with satisfaction that many of these plans incorporated elements of the town's older systems, modified and upgraded rather than completely replaced. As the crowd dispersed, he found himself approached by a small group of students from the community college's engineering program, led by a familiar face, Lisa Chen, from the hospital engineering team. "Mr. Reynolds," she greeted him enthusiastically. "I've been hoping to catch you. I'm teaching a special workshop at the college now, and these are some of my students." The young people regarded Samuel with unmistakable admiration. One stepped forward, hand extended. "Sir, we've been studying your generator bypass. It's brilliant in its simplicity." Samuel accepted the handshake with mild surprise. "Wouldn't have thought that would be part of an engineering curriculum." Lisa smiled. "It wasn't until recently. After Eliza, the department created a new course module called Fundamental Systems Understanding, focused on practical problem solving when digital systems fail." "And you're teaching it?" Samuel asked. She nodded. "Along with my regular duties at the hospital. We'd love to have you guest lecture sometime, share some of your experiences directly." Before Samuel could respond, another voice called his name. He turned to find Emma, his granddaughter, pushing through the crowd toward him. Her unexpected appearance brought a genuine smile to his face. "Grandpa," she exclaimed, embracing him tightly. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "Emma, didn't know you were coming down from Boston?" Samuel said, returning her hug. "Are you kidding? Miss my grandfather being honored as the town hero?" "No way." Her expression grew more serious. "I tried calling for days after the hurricane. When I finally got through and heard what you'd done, just did what needed doing," Samuel said, repeating what had become his standard response. Emma rolled her eyes. "So I've heard. About 100 times from everyone in town." She looked at the engineering students. "Is he being modest about his mechanical genius with you, too?" Lisa laughed. "Absolutely. We're trying to convince him to share his knowledge more formally." "Good luck," Emma said. "I've been trying to get him to write down his stories for years." As they chatted, Tanya Williams approached with William Chambers from the hospital administration. "Mr. Reynolds," Chambers began, "I wanted to update you on some changes we've implemented based on your experience during the hurricane," he outlined. "A new approach to emergency systems at Port Haven Medical Center, one that combined modern technology with accessible mechanical alternatives and comprehensive staff training in fundamental operations. We've also established what we're calling the Reynolds Protocol for emergency bypasses," Tanya added. "It's being shared with medical facilities across the region as part of standard disaster preparedness." Samuel seemed genuinely surprised by this development. "You named a protocol after me? It seemed appropriate," Chambers replied. "Your approach saved lives, not just at our facility, but at others that implemented variations of your bypass." As the conversation continued, Jamal appeared in his security uniform, now bearing a supervisor's insignia. "Mr. Reynolds," he greeted warmly. "Promotion came through last week. They've put me in charge of emergency preparedness for hospital security." "Well deserved," Samuel approved. "It's partly thanks to you," Jamal admitted. "That night in the generator room changed how the administration views practical knowledge versus certification. They're valuing my military experience differently now." The gathering around Samuel continued to grow as more people stopped to share how the hurricane response had affected them. Emma watched with obvious pride as her grandfather, once dismissed as technologically inept, was now sought out for his wisdom. Later, as they walked together toward Samuel's truck, Emma brought up a subject that had clearly been on her mind. "Grandpa, I've been thinking about what happened during the hurricane. How different things might have been if you hadn't known what to do." Samuel nodded, understanding her unspoken concern. "I've been thinking too," he said. "About knowledge that gets lost between generations seems a shame." "It is," Emma agreed quickly, "which is why I have a proposition. I've started recording oral histories for my graduate research. Would you consider letting me record some of your experiences, not just Vietnam, but all the practical knowledge you've accumulated?" Samuel considered this. He'd always been private about his past, seeing little value in revisiting old memories. But Eliza had changed his perspective on many things. "I might," he conceded. "On one condition." "What's that?" "You let me teach you some basic repairs and maintenance. Practical skills to go with your fancy degree." Emma laughed. "Deal, though. I warn you, I'm pretty hopeless with tools." "Everyone is at first," Samuel replied. "That's how learning works." The following weekend, Samuel's driveway held an unusual scene. His granddaughter's sleek hybrid car parked beside his ancient truck, the hood of each vehicle open. Emma stood beside her grandfather, watching intently as his weathered hands pointed out the basic components of her engine. "Digital systems are designed to hide complexity," he explained. "Makes things easier to use but harder to understand. Sometimes you need to look beneath the surface." Emma nodded, recording his explanation on her smartphone while also taking physical notes in a journal, embracing both technologies simultaneously. "Try it yourself now," Samuel encouraged, handing her a wrench. Emma's initial awkwardness with the tool gradually gave way to more confident movements as Samuel patiently guided her through basic maintenance procedures. Her questions were insightful, connecting theoretical knowledge from her studies with practical application. In turn, later that afternoon, she helped Samuel navigate the features of the new smartphone she'd convinced him to try. His resistance to technology had softened somewhat, though he approached the device with the same methodical attention he gave to mechanical systems. "It's just another tool," Emma explained, echoing his own philosophy. "Useful for some things, not for others." Samuel nodded appreciatively at her framing. Everything has its purpose and its limitations. As dusk approached, they sat on Samuel's newly repaired porch, comparing notes on their mutual education. Emma's journal contained detailed diagrams of engine components alongside maintenance procedures. Samuel's new phone held photos of the same, with voice notes he'd recorded about specific techniques. In the distance, Port Haven's rebuilding continued. Construction. Crews combining traditional methods with modern technologies to create structures more resilient than before. The hurricane had destroyed much, but in its aftermath a different kind of community was emerging. One that valued both innovation and experience, digital efficiency and fundamental understanding. "You know what I realized during the hurricane?" Samuel said, watching the sunset. "Knowledge isn't really old or new, it's just knowledge, either useful or not depending on the situation." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "The most valuable education combines both. Theoretical understanding and practical application. Exactly, Samuel agreed. Technology changes, principles don't. As darkness fell over Port Haven, lights came on throughout the recovering town. Electricity, flowing through systems now designed with both sophisticated monitoring and accessible manual controls. The community had learned a powerful lesson from Hurricane Eliza and Samuel Reynolds' pen cap and wire. The most resilient systems are those that bridge the gap between old wisdom and new innovation, creating something stronger than either could provide alone.